Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Today, we're going to be doing a showcase of a language that you have probably seen a little bit of if you've watched the recent live streams, or if you've watched a certain video that I put out a couple months ago. It's been a little bit. This is Hvasvan, or Proto-Sern-Cahilan. That's right. This is the great grandpappy language of Arodjun and several other languages that are going to be coming out of the pipeline over time. In the spirit of me moving on into the next era of this language family's production, I would like to do a nice little showcase just so you could see the exact details of what the proto-language for my con world, for the Hvasvan world, the Bez World. Let's take a look at what it has to offer, see what we have in here. It's tasty, and it's gonna lead to some very cool descendants in the future. Alright, let's take a look. This is Hvasvan, the progenitor of the Sern-Cahilan languages, of which Arodjun is a member. A little bit of background here on how this language developed, and you may know this if you know anything about the lore of the Bez World. After the era of the humans, the world was significantly changed in many ways, as what were formerly dogs, deal with it, mysteriously evolved rapidly to be anthropomorphic and to share the mental and linguistic capacities of the humans that came before them. Several language families developed among countless cultures. Several of these language families formed, seemingly with no single common world ancestor. Different groups gained power or migrated massively over the course of tens of thousands of years. Those who spoke the ancestor languages to Hvasvan lived in small but dense civilizations in what we call our lower Mississippi River region. As the climate changed and the Pernth world order deteriorated in the nearer 5000s before the remodernization, speakers of Hvasvan began to rapidly expand their territorial control, assumedly in a well-structured bureaucratic government. Over the next 2,000 years, the descendants of Hvasvan spread to the east and to the west, becoming the Sern and Cahilan languages respectively. Arodjun is technically a Cahilan language, by the way. Hvasvan has scarce written records, using what is most akin to a logography. This logography did not last very long, and it only conveyed the simple meanings of roots. Thus, most of the grammar of Hvasvan was reconstructed by Cern and Prince scholars in the 1700s to 1900s after the remodernization. This showcase is not of that reconstruction, but of what the language was actually like for those with the most linguistic influence around the year 4725 BR. On the map here, the area that's the deepest red is known as the Proto-Sern-Cahilan Uremhat, and that's the region where Hvasvan was spoken during the earlier 4000s BR. The consonants of Hvasvan are p, b, t, d, t, g, k, g, v, f, v, th, s, z, r, h, r, m, n, ng, la. And its vowels are I, U, U, E, O, A. That is indeed an 8-vowel system right there. The syllable structure, kind of complicated, lots of fricatives. If you haven't noticed from the example text, lots and lots of fricatives, weird consonant clusters and stuff can happen. 3 different categories of fricatives, even though technically ra is one of the ones in F3. That doesn't matter. The grammar. Overall, Hvasvan is a very synthetic language. The word order is pretty much free, though oftentimes the nominative in indicative statements will end up getting the head position of the sentence. It'll end up coming up to the front, or maybe the verb will be in the front and then the nominative and then the accusative, etc. But overall, it can be in any structure as you want because it's a very synthetic language. The adjectives can be placed before or after the noun, and they really don't even need to be right next to the noun that they're associated with, because they're generally going to be conjugated with the same exact suffixes, declensions, etc. as the noun that they are associated with. Prepositions, or as they should really more accurately be labeled in this situation, adpositions, can be placed before or after the associated noun. And generally these adpositions are also declined for the same case and gender as the associated nouns. However, there's several irregularities, several variations to this rule. Adverbs can be placed before or after a verb and are usually connected to their associated verbs by featuring the same tense prefix as said verbs. So they're not all the way conjugated, but they're at least given the same tense prefix. We'll get into what that means later. This pattern really only works for the main conjugated verb of a clause, and as such, there are many situations where this tense prefix is omitted or other morphological alterations are inserted there instead. Now, cases and declensions. There's a lot. Hvasvan has 6 grammatical cases. So there's the nominative / ergative case, which I usually just label as the agent. There is the accusative or absolutive case, which I usually just label as the patient. There's dative, genitive, locative, and instrumental. Then there's also 7 classes of phonologically derived declensions, and the numbers of nouns are divided into singular, pockle, plural, and collective. So when looking at the various declensions and cases for a certain noun, a table would look something like this. So for the root word dvos, which means smoke, you have all these possibilities here. With all the cases, all the numbers, it's quite a bit, and this is only a class 5 noun declension. Alright, see that? So class 1 is roots that end with a, e, I, o, u, or the stronger vowels. Class 2 is for roots that end with a, u, and e, or like the rounded or weaker vowels. Class 3 is for roots that end with h or he. Class 4 is for roots that end with la. Class 5, as we saw, is for roots that end with sa or za. Class 6 is for roots that end with any other fricatives. Class 7 is for roots that end with any non-fricative consonants. So the most regular of these are classes 1 and 7, with the most rare of them being class 3 and 4. Now, pronouns, genders, animacy, and person. Now, pronouns follow very irregular patterns of case and declension. They have their own entire sets of charts. Not only this, but the division of pronouns is pretty weird. Now, gender and animacy are a quite blended concept in the grammar of Hvasvan. Humans, other than the first person and the general concept of a human, are divided into adults and children, right? Those are the genders. Adult, child. A pronoun hierarchy exists, measured in terms of animacy and proximity. So on the top of the hierarchy is natural phenomena, weather, the actions of the divine, which I like to call zeroth person just to meme. And on the bottom of this scale, there are just basic inanimate objects like rocks and stuff. There's 12 total categories here. Now, the proximity of these humans is a very important distinction in Hvasvan. So there's 3 levels of proximity. There's the near proximate, there's the far obviate, and the furthest far obviate. The first person does not distinguish proximity, but the difference between second person and third person are kind of blurred depending on the context of the conversation you're having. Like, a near proximate pronoun can equally be used to refer to the second person in casual conversation, like I am talking to you, and it can also be used to refer to like the main character, the subject of a story that's being told. So say you're telling a story about John going to the store, it would basically sound like, alright, so you're going to the store, and then etc. So the concepts are kind of blurred together. There's no strict second person versus third person. Here is a table for what the agent, nominative / ergative pronouns look like. Again, there's 12 categories. There's zeroth, which is for weather, nature, and God, or everything in general. And you have first person, you have the near proximate adult, the far obviate adult, the furthest far obviate adult, the near proximate child, the far obviate child, the furthest far obviate child. Humans, which it's kind of a vague term, it kind of is like the one does not do something sort of kind of indefinite person or like the human race as a whole, or like people groups, entire like tribes or nations or stuff like that. A blurrily defined concept there for humans. Then below humans, there's mammals, birds, and reptiles, like the more sentient of animals as people would perceive it. Then there's plants, insects, and arachnids, the things that may or may not be considered to have a soul at all, but are still like living things. And then there's the inanimate objects, which is basically everything else that doesn't have any kind of life force to it. Verbs. Verbs are fun. So verbs are conjugated based on a reduced version of how that pronoun chart is working. Instead of 12 categories of pronouns, there are 7 categories of verbs. The 5 that are missing, you may be asking what happened to them. Well, they're really kind of accounted for by the fact that the verbs don't conjugate for the adult-child gender system, and the proximity system is different. The near, far, furthest kind of divide gets put into some of these 7 categories of verbs, as you'll see when I go to the chart on the next slide. Now, Hvasvan verbs are divided into 2 categories. There are strong verbs and weak verbs. The strong verbs are like highly common verbs that go through the most intense patterns of conjugation and sound changes and stuff. Really basic stuff like to go, to kill, to burn, etc., inspired by, like Germanic languages in our world. But there are irregularities that exist for strong verbs and weak verbs. Then Hvasvan experiences like a mild split ergativity. It's not much, so in this case it means that should a ditransitive clause occur, as in a sentence where there is a subject, an object, and an indirect object, the relationship between agent and patient gets switched grammatically in the sentence. So the verb will conjugate itself in relation to the patient instead of the agent whenever the clause has an indirect object of any kind, like a locative or an instrumental or a dative or any of that. That will cause the absolutive ergative switch to happen. It's not the only time that it happens, but now here is a strong verb conjugation chart right here. Tiltung, which is the verb to give. It's a strong verb, and you can see the key is up on the top right here. A lot of stuff happens to strong verbs. They have like rounding vowels in the root. The final syllable can be deleted to make way for the ending. Final fricatives can become plosives to make them fit in better. All kinds of things happen, and this is for regular strong verbs. There are irregulars that I'm not even gonna really go into that much because this is just a proto-language. These are the strong verbs, and then here is a weak verb conjugation. Now we have gyunga, which is to grow, is a weak verb, and there's a lot less irregularity in this. There's a lot less weird rules that have to happen in order to create these conjugations. But you can see, again, with both of them, really, you can see the sentience hierarchy along with the singular, pockle, plural, collective, where these 7 categories now we have weather, God, nature, so still that 0th person. We have me, oneself, and a subject, which is kind of like the best way that I could describe that verbs are conjugated combining first person with the subject of a story. So whereas there's 2 separate categories for that in the pronouns, they're both conjugated the same way. So first person and the near proximate person, whether it's a child or an adult, if they are the subject of a dialogue that's happening, then it's going to be conjugated that way. Then close person is really for obviate, not far obviate, but just the middle obviate marker there. That's for people who you are witnessing doing something, whether you're speaking to them as a second person or whether they are third person but just not the main subject of a subject that's going on. Again, kind of hard to explain, but it works. Then the humans category is again like either for one does not do this thing or for entire people groups of humans, etc. Then again you have the mammals, birds, reptiles, the plants, insects, arachnids, and the basic inanimate objects. Not only are there those conjugations, but there's also tense marking, and the tense marking in Hvasvan involves taking either fa for the future, sa for the present, nothing for the near past or for general statements where the tense doesn't really matter that much, and ha for the far past. those fricatives need to get slapped on as prefixes onto the beginning of the verb. And the way Hvasvan's phonology works, the way its phonotactics works, this is fine in pretty much all situations. The only situation where this wouldn't work is if the verb itself, say like it started with an S and it's supposed to get another S put onto it, then it would just be thrown out the window and it would be left up to context for people to be able to tell what tense that's in. But of course, if that's happening, then people are most likely gonna get it whenever they're listening to it. It's just a quirky feature of the way the language works. And then then there is evidentiality and aspect marking. So evidentiality and aspect are kind of blended together in Hvasvan. So there's 4 aspects. There's nomic, aorist, habitual, and indicative, which are conjugated, for lack of a better word, for their evidentiality, which goes witness, rumored, hypothesize, and imagine, in a small particle that appears at the end of many but not all clauses. It doesn't need to happen all the time, only when this evidentiality and aspect are like important enough to actually mention. So another fun fact, these particles likely served as a very long distant origin for the subject pro words in Arodjun. So there's the table down there at the bottom of the evidentiality and aspect marking table. So nomic, I have it best described as a general rule. That's for like people making statements about the way the world works in general. Aorist is for a completed action. It's kind of like perfective, but it's referring to the fact that something is completely and utterly finished. Habitual is something that happens often, something that happens in an iterative kind of way. It could also be considered an iterative aspect. And then there's indicative, which indicates an event is occurring or had occurred or will occur, etc. And then these are all conjugated with that evidentiality in there. You know, whether this thing is confirmed or witnessed, this is a thing that is true. It's rumored, as in it is assumed to be true, but there's no direct evidence in front of the person who is speaking, so they can't say with 100% confidence unless they're lying. Then there is hypothesized evidentiality, which is someone is making a claim, but they're making a claim about something that they don't know whether it's going to end up being true or not, or whether it ended up being true or not. And then there is the imagined evidentiality, which is for when people are talking about dreams, or they're talking about something that they don't think could actually happen in real life, but they're just talking about imagination. Again, those don't need to go at the end of every clause, but they go where emphasizing those facts are necessary, or where aspect is really important for the context of the sentence. And just a couple other little tidbits of information. We have the construction for conditional clauses. You start with at, and you include a gerundative version of whatever verb is required to happen for the conditional thing in the future to potentially happen. Then you will put that verb of the thing that's supposed to happen in the future tense, and you will give it a hypothetical indicative marker. And referential nouns, like, it, that may be referring to any something. So referential nouns will take on conjugations for the locative case. Why? Mystery. If there are multiple, which cannot be distinguished by obviate proximate markers, then the closer referential noun will be marked with the locative, while the more obviate referential noun will be marked with the instrumental. So there can be 2 its in a sentence, and just because of the case that they're conveniently declined into, it will give you the context that you need to keep the story going. Then copular statements, which do not technically contain a defined subject or object, are to have both of their nouns displayed as absolutive concepts. And by that I mean they're going to be marked in the absolutive accusative case. That's another situation where the split ergativity comes into play, technically. Not only that, but there are occasional instances of elision, which can happen. So if a root has its syllable count increased due to declension or affixation, and it contains 2 identical vowels, and the stress lies in the first of these 2 vowels, then the second vowel will be elided or deleted from the word. So, as an example, we have this root word, pudim, and then we have the word in its patient situation, perhaps an absolutive, perhaps an accusative case, where it would be pudimin, but since we have pudimin, the actualized word, to keep the syllable count still at 2, will become pudmin. And then there's kind of a quasi form of vowel harmony that happens very sporadically, but it's not like a fully developed system in Hvasvan. It is in some of the descendant languages, you'll see that. But in this situation, if a word contains u or e, then a right to left kind of vowel harmony is likely to take place, affecting u and o respectively. Not any of the other vowels, just u and o can be converted into e and e. Now, this is not always the case. It generally occurs whenever the e and e are occurring within an affix or a declension or something like that. Whenever one of the suffixes has those sounds in it, then it's likely to pull in the u and the o to follow it throughout the entire word, if that makes sense. And finally, just to make one last little comparison, we have a sample text, a very special sample text to me, the Avatar theme song, and it is translated into both Arodjun, and it is also translated into Hvasvan. We're just going to take a look, because they are very, very different from each other. And I just wanted to show, like, these are from the same language family, but you probably would not even be able to tell upon like looking at it at first, which is good because this is like 6,000 years of difference. You really shouldn't be able to tell. Like, there's a reason the Dene-Unisian thing is like so impossible to prove with it beyond the shadow of a doubt. Anyway, so we have long ago the four nations lived together in harmony. In Arodjun, as you might know, Nyo Irjuklo, Kotinyam Fipa Metawan Johwak Unya. Whereas in Hvasvan, it's everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. In Arodjun, or in Hvasvan, only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. In Arodjun, in Hvasvan, Avatar but when the world needed him most, he vanished. In Arodjun, and in Hvasvan, and that's it. There it is, everybody. That is a very basic showcase of Hvasvan. I'm going to put more in-depth information about it on my website, nga.org, relatively soon, so keep your eyes peeled out for that if you really want to dive into some more thick and juicy content on that subject. I hope you enjoyed it, because this, Hvasvan, is the predecessor to a series of languages that are going to become anatomy over. It's probably going to take like a year before I can have this language family fully developed. It's going to be a kind of long-term project, but I know you guys are going to stick around. We have a great time. I'm excited to see what you think of it. With all that being said, that's pretty much it for today. Yeah, make sure to like the video, to subscribe, help us get to 2,000 subs before the end of the year. Why don't you check out my Patreon? We recently got a few more patrons since the iceberg video came out, and I'm super happy about that. Really cool people. They're going to be added onto the list, of course. And yes, if you become a patron, if you donate, you know, even just $1 or $3 or $10, you know, you can email me. I can help you with your conlangs. You get the secret chat on the Discord server, and it helps me, gives me inspiration, helps me recuperate for all the money that I've spent doing things for this channel over the past year and a half. Again, especially, you know, like Jerry Seinfeld, the pangolin here, end result of that. But I believe. So join the Discord if you want to talk to me, like literally any day, and pretty much every day I'm on there. For now, I will see y'all in the next video. Nga out. See, Jerry Seinfeld approves. Enough said.